So the Pelican season is not over yet. I'm aware of that. I'm going to do an entire off-season video on them when inevitably their season does end, probably in the first round of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Having said that, I have so many thoughts about the future roster construction of this team that I continue to think about during the series, and I feel like it needs to be talked about now. So the thing with New Orleans over the last couple of seasons has been they have this really bright future. They have all these future first-round picks. They have young guys. They added TJ McCollum. They added Jonas Valanciunas. They put together a core that can compete for playoff spots now and has a really bright future moving forward. However, the more and more that I look at this roster, the more I actually question how much of a long-term team they truly are. Because when you really look at the first-round picks that they have moving forward into the future, they're not actually that great. Unless Giannis leaves Milwaukee within a season or two and those Milwaukee picks are really good, their future draft picks are not the number one thing they have going for them. The number one thing they have going for them is the actual roster right now. The handful of guys that are really important to them include Zion, of course, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy. Handful of other guys as well. You know, maybe Dyson Daniels becomes something. Jordan Hawkins can really shoot, but like those are the four guys. Those four guys can't play together. And that is the thing that I continue to come back to, not only during this series, but during the play-in when Zion was still healthy. Continue to go back to, these four guys are really good. One of them has to go. And this has been a thing for New Orleans throughout the season when Trey Murphy's been healthy, when the entire team has been healthy. Generally speaking, there are moments where they are just better when it is just Zion or Brandon Ingram on the floor, and then the other guy is replaced by Trey Murphy. Then you have the defensive prowess of Trey Jones, and there's a combination of those four players in which you only put three of them on the floor, where the Pelicans are an absolutely terrifying team. And obviously, the odd man out of that would also be extremely valuable if you were to offer them in a trade. And as I mentioned earlier, their future outlook in terms of draft picks isn't actually as good as maybe you would think that it would be. It is a roster construction that through really good drafting, getting Herb Jones in the second round, getting Trey Murphy later on in the first round, and then the development of Brandon Ingram and Zion. It is a roster that suddenly you have too much of things that don't all fit together, yet three of them in some combination are an incredible wing, group of three players. Which leads me to where I'm going with this. I think Brandon Ingram within the next 18 months is going to be on a different basketball team. And it doesn't really have anything to do with how he plays in this first round against Oklahoma City. It has everything to do with the fact that Zion, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones. Those are the three guys that I want on the wing. Presuming that Zion wants to be on the team long term, they have him signed long term. I want those three guys. I want to figure it out at the 1, and I want to figure it out at the 5, but I want those three guys. And Brandon Ingram doesn't fit in that anywhere. Unless Zion's going to play the small ball 5 or he's going to play point guard, Brandon Ingram is the odd man out there. Herb Jones and Trey Murphy, what they do defensively as two-way players is extremely valuable, and Brandon Ingram's skill set increasingly seems kind of redundant on this roster. If and only if Zion wants to be there long-term and he continues to be healthy and play the way that he has the last couple of months. That's why this hasn't really been entertained as a thought too much for me, is because Zion's been incredibly inconsistent. He's been hurt. He's not been in great shape. But the Zion that we saw the last 2 months prior to him getting hurt, that's the guy that I want. Brandon Ingram's good mid-range scorer, can shoot the ball, someone that is going to be really good for some other team probably. I want Zion if he's going to be this version of himself over the last 2 months, which means I think Brandon Ingram could find himself on a new team. And the other big part of this that has to be mentioned as well, Brandon Ingram is a 2025 unrestricted free agent. He currently does not have an extension in place. And in 2025, he can just go somewhere else. So it's not like this is something that New Orleans can slow play and try and figure it out later. They might have to figure that out this offseason. This might be something that they need to decide on really, really quickly, depending on how the season ends, what happens over the next 18 months, because you can't realistically go into an offseason in 2025 without Brandon Ingram under contract, because there are going to be a ton of teams that are going to want to pay him as a young player, and guys at that age that are as good as he is typically don't just enter into unrestricted free agency anymore. And it's a situation that they need to figure out, right? And when you look at the roster, when you have those three guys, Zion, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, if you can upgrade at the 1, I think eventually CJ McCollum is someone that they're going to move on from, and then you can upgrade at the 5, whether it be Jonas Valanciunas plus some stuff, whatever the case may be. Figure out those two spots. You're a contender in the Western Conference. With the version of Zion that we've seen the last couple of months, with a steady point guard, with a really good 5-man, like if you put I don't know, some kind of high level point guard, and then you put Clint Capella at the 5. Like, this is a contending roster. I truly, truly believe that. And given how the future picks look, it makes sense to me to explore the possibility of trading away Brandon Ingram, whether it be this offseason or at next year's trade deadline. And it's weird how I've gotten to that conclusion, because this is something that I've considered in the past, but the reasoning for considering that was totally different than what it is now. The reasoning for considering that before was either it was to trade away Zion because he didn't want to be there, or because you thought you could get a ton of value for him, or because it was just a lost cause and he was never going to be able to figure it out, get healthy, be in shape, or I didn't like the skill set of those two guys together, especially defensively. That's no longer the thought process. The thought process is just that Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, and Zion, those three guys together are fantastic, and coincidentally all happen to play positions that Brandon Ingram exclusively plays. So when you go along that line of thinking, it's very easy to quickly get to the point of it's time for Brandon Ingram to go somewhere else, because you can't bring Brandon Ingram off the bench. And I think we're quickly approaching the point at which you can't bring Herb Jones or Trey Murphy off the bench either. Those guys are too good. And like I said, unless you're going to do some really weird stuff positionally, someone would have to come off the bench. Now, having said all those things, certainly it's realistic to expect that maybe the Pelicans are just going to sign Brandon Ingram to an extension in the offseason and figure it out later. Maybe that's the responsible choice, right? You maintain the asset of having Brandon Ingram on the team. Trey Murphy continues to come off the bench. You spend a ton of money on 4 wings that are all really, really good. Everybody in the league wants to have a ton of good wings, and that's a realistic possibility that they look at the extension situation for Brandon Ingram, throw the max at him, and just figure it out later. That's certainly a possibility. All I'm saying is that on the current trajectory of Herb Jones, Trey Murphy's development, and the way that Zion looked the last 2 months, this is something that has to get solved at some point. It is not tenable to have those 4 guys on the roster at the same time and expect one of them to come off the bench. It is not an efficient use of the salary cap. It is not an efficient use of resources as a team. And the best thing that they could do is to get value out of somebody. And the easiest guy to find to get value out of, in my opinion at least, would be Brandon Ingram. Now, this can all change within, a couple of months, right? Because Zion could go back to being who he was before these last couple of months and not really paying attention as much, not really being in as good a shape. And then all of a sudden, yeah, it makes total sense to keep Brandon Ingram, because you still need the star, right? Like, you need the guy that would fill in that Zion spot if Zion just completely falls off. And I think that's certainly a possibility. And it would be kind of a disaster for New Orleans if at some point they traded away Brandon Ingram and then Zion went back to who he was and wasn't as good as he has been the last couple of months. And that's what makes all this tricky, right? But if you operate in a theoretical universe in which Zion is this guy that he has been for 2 months, Trey Murphy and Herb Jones continue to develop. If you operate in that universe, at some point, Brandon Ingram has to be on a different basketball team. He's just the odd man out. It has nothing to do with him not being good enough. It has nothing to do with potential value you could get in trades. It's just the fit of the roster. Zion's ceiling is higher. He's overall better at a lot of stuff. And at some point, you just have to prioritize one guy over the other. And I think increasingly it looks like Brandon Ingram is not going to be the guy that gets prioritized.